I didn't get an opportunity to do one of these last week. I had a lot of things going on, but the one for this week was actually kind of inspired by a comment from a subscriber, and the comment was so good that I think I'll just open up the video with it. And I'm still having issues being able to go between tabs and being able to, like, sometimes when I'm doing a response video to an article and I'll click over and read the article and then I'll come back here, but it's not working with this computer lately. I've tried updating drivers, I've tried doing a lot of other things, and until I figure out whatever it is, I got to use the handheld phone for this. But they commented on a video and they said the part of the big book I laugh at the most is the following passage near the end in the chapter Dr. Bob's Nightmare. And generally, when you read a topic in an AA meeting that's from the stories in the back of the book, there's always some asshole old timer that has to pop up out of the blue and say, well, it's not in the first 164 pages. My sponsor told me you got to stay in the first 164 pages, that you can't look at the stories in the back of the book until you've been sober for about 10 years. And I remember when I had been in AA for a couple of years, I actually one day flipped to those stories in the back of the book, which they updated quite frequently in the first, second, third. At the time that I left AA, there was a fourth edition. They probably got a fifth and sixth one out by now. But it was funny. With every one of those stories, it was like reading a speaker meeting minutes. And, half of them I never read. Believe it or not, I would start the story out and I would say, okay, this is another boring pile of shit, and I would flip to the next story, and I'd say, okay, this one's pretty boring. And but the one that was read at a lot of meetings, it was either the one about how acceptance is the answer to all my problems today, and they would split hairs about it not being in the first 164. They would read Dr. Bob's Nightmare, which you didn't get disputed as often in meetings because Dr. Bob is one of the sacred founding fathers that could do no wrong. But the subscriber commented to me and he said, the part of the big book I laugh at the most is the following passage in Dr. Bob's Nightmare. If you think you're an atheist, an agnostic, a skeptic, or have any other form of intellectual pride which keeps you from accepting what is in this book, I feel sorry for you. Talk about smug and condescending. It's totally your fault that you don't fall in line and obey the cult religion because you're an atheist, an agnostic. You're an intellectual that has pride in his intellect and his, learning abilities and his scholarly academic works. I feel sorry for you. You can't even phrase "I feel sorry for you" in any other way other than the condescending way it's written. It's saying, if you don't think just like me, I feel sorry for you. But the subscriber went on to write, if any definite proof was needed that this book is anti-intellectual, which, the book is pretty much predominantly filled with, if you're a thinking person or you have any kind of critical thinking skills, or even if you're just a person, because I'm not some fucking genius, I'm not some Harvard graduate, that's well-versed in every kind of academic scholarly work on philosophy and religion, all the way back from the dawn of time or something like that. But if you have any kind of questioning abilities about you, then they feel sorry for you. But anyway, if any definite proof was needed that this book is anti-intellectual, which seems to belie the fact that earlier they falsely implied that their advice is only a suggestion, this is it. This also seems to go against another axiom of theirs, which warns against contempt before investigation. Yet they blatantly contradict this. In their immediate dismissal of any form of intellectualism, they're more or less telling you that, they've dismissed you because you don't fall in line with my religion. You don't believe what we tell you in this book. You question it. We just feel fucking sorry for you. You're just a sorry piece of shit. You're a bad person, because it keeps you from just swallowing our dogmatic religion. But it got me to thinking about not just the contempt prior to investigation, but the hidden judgment that I used to see prevalent in the rooms of anybody who thought outside the box. Now, it was funny. I remember one meeting when I was fairly new, I remember a guy saying, can you actually do this program without believing in God? And a whole bunch of people kind of attacked him. For one thing, he spoke without being called on. For another thing, he asked a question. You have to go by the rigid format. We can't deviate from the format. And the format is the chairperson reads their topic that we've all heard a million times before, and then the chairperson calls on the select group of people that are allowed to talk and blabber and spew their nonsense. And we all have to sit there and just be grateful to be in their presence so they can tell us how wonderful they are, even though they'll tell you they're practicing humility. But he spoke out of turn and said, can you do this without believing in God? And everybody said, well, you got to read We Agnostics. You got to read We Agnostics, which it was funny when I first read We Agnostics. I was like, well, this isn't, it's funny how many warning bells was going off in my head at the time. But, like any obedient cult member that believed that it was all suggestions and was told that, this is the only way out on quitting drinking, I ignored those warning bells, sadly enough. But there was a sneering, condescending judgment towards people, who were well-read or who had any kind of intellectual pride, which I thought was really funny. I've read a lot of books in my life, not because I'm some great scholarly professor or something like that. It's because I've always liked to read. When I was a kid growing up, I didn't necessarily have just whole hordes of friends. I wasn't the most popular kid in school or something like that. The local library was a stone's throw away from where I grew up, and I could walk to the library, and primarily what I read was fiction as a kid growing up. But every time I read, though, something that kind of dazzled me or kind of made me think or even something philosophical or even something that was scientific or whatever the fuck it was, I never felt like I had all this intellectual pride, ooh, I read this book, I'm a smart man now, I know every fucking thing, I know more than you do, and I feel sorry for you if you don't think just like me and you ain't read this book. I don't recall ever having this bizarre form of intellectual pride that they talk about. It's funny how Bill W. ascribes everything to the people who won't swallow his dogma as either being full of pride or full of this or full of this intellectualism or whatever it is, a prejudice. He lays that out 2 or 3 times in We Agnostics. If you can't lay aside your prejudice, well, it's not prejudice to have a thinking brain and somebody comes up to you on the street and says, there's an invisible realm that's going to reach out, a spirit of the universe, and it's going to lift your drinking problem right out of your brain. And you're a prejudiced, closed-minded individual if you don't believe me just because I said so. I mean, that's actually called being a rational human being. But it got me to thinking about one thing I used to hear. There was one guy that I really detested. Well, that's kind of not the exception. That's kind of the norm. But he was one of those old-timers. He was always high on his own grandiosity. He always had to share the same old shares. But he would always close with the same thing. I know some people think you can do this without spirituality. But spiritual people have happier lives than people who don't. Which is an unproven assertion that you have no way of even being able to falsify or even prove, because you can't define what a spiritual person is. I mean, apparently, from his point of view, a spiritual person is being a miserable asshole like him that berates everybody for not being as sober and spiritual as he was, exploiting newcomer sponsors and treating people like garbage that didn't have as much clean time as he had. And that apparently was supposed to qualify as someone having a happier life than someone who doesn't live like that. Nobody's ever proven to me successfully, from my own observation and the observation of many people I've talked to, or the people who comment on these videos or in groups that are people who have left AA. Nobody's shown me that any of these people are remotely spiritual, which, like I said, that's such a broad term that you can't even define what it is, because it's obviously not doing some kind of good deed or being some, like some person that gives of other people and never thinks about themselves like they try to portray themselves as. I mean, apparently, according to AA, being a spiritual person who has a happier life than everybody else is going to meetings and drinking coffee and smoking cheap cigarettes and bitching and complaining about how miserable your life is and complaining about how everybody else is not as spiritual as you are, and being overjoyed when people relapse and saying some have to die so that others can live when other people don't get the program. Is that what you call having a happier life? Because most of those people I met in those meetings that were supposed to be the gurus that we looked up to for life advice were always chronically unemployed, was always bumming money off people, was always borrowing cigarettes off people, was always looking at somebody less than them that they could screw over, and primarily seemed to live their whole life hanging out in AA meetings, majoring in hanging out in AA meetings and being called on and regurgitating the talking points that were in their little cult book. They'd sit there with their highlighters. They had them in pink and yellow, and they'd have all this stuff underlined. I'm like, you've been hanging out here for almost 20 fucking years, and you need to highlight shit. You don't, you haven't memorized this 164 pages after all this time. It reminded me of a book I picked up in a library several years ago when it first came out, because there was an AA old timer and he was saying, "Oh, this book will explain everything. You know, it's so deep," which naturally turned out not to be. But it was called "Why God Won't Go Away." And when I opened it up and I started reading it, at the time, it looked like it was going to be kind of an interesting, losing my voice again, scientific premise as it was talking about, which I kind of got skeptical halfway through it, because they were saying that the brains of people who meditate, or the brains of these, they call those, I forgot the name of it, I can't say it, these Muslim, they do these whirling dervish type dances. I can't say the name of the sect off the top of my head. If I could go on the internet, I could find it right now for you. But that all these people, when they're having these ecstatic religious experiences, the same parts of their brains are activated. That, like, whether you're, kneeling before a statue in the Catholic Church, like I would have done growing up, which I wouldn't do now, and you're, holding your rosary beads and you're saying your Hail Marys and your Our Fathers and all that kind of thing, that you're, the same part of your brain that's feeling kind of like this blissful activation is the same part of the brain that a Zen monk, in Japan somewhere would feel if he was sitting in a temple with his hands out, well, I think the Zen people hold their hands like that when they're sitting cross-legged, but you get my point. The same part of the brain is activated. Now, at first, this kind of hinted at the hardwired belief, being more of a byproduct of evolution, a biological product of evolution, which really wouldn't sway the religious people. They'd say, well, God put that in the brain on purpose, kind of like the AA people I used to hear that would say God made them alcoholics so they could come to AA meetings. You think a lot of yourself, do you not? This whole vast world full of all these people, all these problems, and all these things that are happening each and every day that affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, everything from a banking collapse to, a war or a famine or a pandemic. But in all of that, the whole entire universe was set aside a moment so you could drink yourself to death and be an asshole to everybody, so you could sober up and be an even more sanctimonious asshole to everybody in AA. That was all carved out and pre-planned and predestined for you. But the book veered off, the Why God Won't Go Away, it veered off into nonsense, because it started citing a whole lot of stuff that I knew for a fact wasn't true as I continued reading the book, because it started out, like I said, like a scientific book, and then it veered off into quackery, because it started talking about, religious people in hospitals heal faster than non-religious people in hospitals, which I don't have the links in front of me that I could pull them up and prove that, but that's been disproven. That the idea that people who prayed seem to have better mental health than people who do not pray, and I can tell you as someone who grew up in a religious household, surrounded by a bunch of religious people in the Catholic Church that were all hypocrites and liars and assholes and everything else, that is not true. But the thing goes on to do what the AA old-timer was always talking about, that spiritual people are happier than people who are not, which is kind of interesting. I could pull up the stats in front of me of the European countries that are largely more secular than the United States is, that seem to have a better quality of life in terms of everything from healthcare to just an overall better outlook on life in terms of positivity. There was even a book I read one time about a certain attitude in Finland. I can't think of the name of it again because I didn't know I was going to bring it up for this video, where anything could be accomplished with self-determination and will. If I ever think of the name of it, that could be in a whole nother video on top of that. But it's just making a baseless assertion about something that really you can't even prove. Like if I said to you, people who wear ball caps on their heads sometimes because they're too lazy to comb their hair, which I'm not too lazy to comb my hair, it just keeps it in place, it's a force of habit. But if I said people who wear ball caps on their heads when they go out in public, especially during the cold weather, they have much more happier and fulfilling lives than people who don't wear ball caps. People who wear stocking caps have much happier lives than people who don't have stocking caps. There's no way to prove that. There's no way to study that. There's no way to define that. There's no way to actually do that, but they would, the same guy would talk in a meeting about, the spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it, and they would veer off into the whole entire thing about the people who aren't spiritual, just a miserable people. And of course, when someone would die or relapse or whatever, they would blame it on their lack of connection to a higher power, or they would blabber that horse shit about the sunlight or the spirit. and all that other thing. But if you can't even clearly define what spiritual is, you don't have a theory. You see, a theory, as it works in the scientific community, is when you say, I notice all these guys that are this particular age group, that have this particular background, all engage in this particular type of habit, and I notice they all suffer from this same kind of illness or this same kind of disorder. But I don't know if that's true or not. Let me grab about 10,000 people and study them and see if there's any correlation here. And of course, in order to do that, you got to get on the phone to the right people and say, hey, I need a lot of money here so I can study and make this hypothesis an actual theory. But blabbering a bunch of pseudo-spiritual nonsense and claiming that those people have a better quality of life than the people who don't follow this pseudo-spiritual blabbering nonsense is just an unfounded assertion with no basis in any kind of reality, objective reality that you could prove whatsoever. But of course, AA believes it exists in a different universe, independent of the real world. It was kind of like another old timer told me, well, see, the big book wouldn't make sense to a non-alcoholic. You have to be an alcoholic, then it makes sense. So in other words, the book is some kind of weird mishmash of puzzled letters that don't connect to anything unless you get drunk enough long enough and you come to AA and read it, and then all of a sudden it all comes together and makes perfect sense. The funny thing about this is AA has an abysmal failure rate, an abysmally high failure rate. And as a matter of fact, and I've talked before in other videos about people like George Valiant that set out to prove AA worked, to prove AA was better than any other kind of mode of treatment whatsoever, and prove that the rates were horrifying, that the rates of suicides, the binge drinking rates, the out of control rates, all of that was way worse than in people who didn't get any kind of intervention or help whatsoever. Now, this was further back in time before, some of the more broader avenues of recovery have become available to the modern world. But he ended up just saying, well, the program still does a lot of good because it leads people to God. But that kind of refutes itself when you look at the abysmal failure rates of AA. See, the very thing that they talk about in meetings, some have to die so that others can live, doesn't really hold water when you think about this. The large majority of AA meetings I've been to, and a large majority of AA meetings that a lot of other people I know out here have been to, are revolving doors, right? You go into an AA meeting, you see a select group of the AA hierarchy, as you hear me refer to them as in a lot of videos, and then you see a steady stream of people coming in and out, like via the courts, via the treatment centers, via whatever it is. Or you just see people show up for a period of time, get their 90-day coins or 6-month coins, and then boom, out of nowhere, you never see them again. AA has an extremely high turnover rate. So how many people have to die so a tiny little minority of people in their fellowship can live? When they say some have to die so that others can live, well, given the failure rates of it, okay, that would be like if you took 1 million people and, 950,000 of them all died and the remaining one standing said, well, see, they all had to die so we could live. It doesn't really kind of jive in the miracle category that AA members seem to smugly imply that they're in. If you're an atheist, an agnostic, or a free thinker, and you have no form of, you have intellectual pride and no form of humility to swallow everything we're preaching in this phony horseshit book, I feel sorry for you. We could turn that around, actually. If you're one of the people that swallow this dogmatic shit and end up drinking yourself to death while these smug assholes sit around and talk about how wonderful they are, I truly do feel bad for you, because I was one of those people that actually thought there was a kernel of truth in that pile of shit called AA. And anyway, that's my 18 minutes and 45 seconds for this week. Before I say I'll see you again next time, there is something that I don't like announcing, and it's not something I don't want to do this, but it won't take me but a few minutes to explain it. I'm just going to put it in the video description. You're not obligated to do this because, like I've said before, I don't take a penny for making this channel. I'm not going to make some Patreon, ooh, give me $100 a month and I'll sit here all day long and bash AA for you. I don't feel right doing that. I kind of feel like, this video doesn't cost me nothing to make. I work a full-time job. It doesn't take me more than 20, 30 minutes out of a week. So I wouldn't feel right doing that. I'd just rather put this out there for anybody to see whenever. But I did have a situation. It was towards the end of November. It was right at the beginning of December when I got really, really badly ill. Some people who are members of Quackaholics Anonymous, in Facebook probably already know about this, but I lost almost a month of work due to a COVID pneumonia type situation. I went to an emergency room for 12 hours. That's all I was there for, by the way, was 12 hours. X-rays, CAT scans, and pretty much got sent home. I didn't really want to go to the hospital. I had people around me twisting my arm to go there, but even though I had a very high fever, even though I was a little bit delirious, even though I was out of my head, I was typing all kinds of bizarre, disjointed stuff to people in messages and Facebook. I was really out of it, so I wasn't in good health at all. But I ended up, less than a week after getting out of the hospital, I got hit with an $8,000 bill. I thought that was ridiculous. I called my insurance company. I talked to my insurance company, and they were billed like 41 grand for this. And I asked for itemized breakdowns of the bill. It was like $13,000 just to get an x-ray, all that other kind of shit. I'm not trying to tug at your hearts for a sob story here. I'm just kind of outlining why this is going to be in the comment description. But I filed a dispute with my insurance company when I was able to, because I was sick most of December and I was just barely recuperating in January. I lost a lot of time from work. I got behind on a lot of bills, which I'm thankfully getting caught up on now. But the insurance company filed a dispute, but they ended up not doing anything with it. When I called the hospital, I've been given the runaround. They're telling me they want $350 to $400 a month, which I told them I couldn't pay. I've heard of people saying they can send, $10, $20 a month to hospital bills and keep it from collections. This particular hospital was threatening garnishment of my wages and lawsuits and all this. Now, I don't know how true it is. I don't know if they can get away with that or not. But as of right now, I was trying to argue with them about maybe one lump settlement payout. They're rejecting it. They're not working with me. I tried to talk to a patient advocate. I haven't really gotten there, made any leeway there. So I did start a GoFundMe to try to pay for this hospital bill. It's not something I'm proud to do. I like being independent. I like being self-sufficient. I don't like having to ask like this. And I'm not going to try to guilt trip you into doing it, but I am going to post a link to my GoFundMe in this channel description. If you want to give anything, you can. If you can't give anything, that's fine. If you don't want to give anything, that's fine too. Nobody's under any pressure to give to me. So any dollar or any whatever you want to give is appreciated. I mean, like I said, if I don't make nothing out of the GoFundMe, then I'm no worse off than I was before I started it. I'll let the hospital bill go to collections, and I'll maybe argue with collections and see what I can do with them, But anyway, until next time, I was just going to bring that up. Like I said, part of me is a little cringed at the thought that I got to do this. But until next time, that's it. Later.